I'm sure Dr. Yogendra Yadav needs absolutely no introduction over here. In many respects, I think many of you know him better than I do, because some of you have been working very closely with him. But I just want to say a few things about Dr. Yogendra Yadav before we give the microphone over to him, which I'm sure is also something that you know probably better than me, but at the risk of some people here who might benefit from that introduction. Dr. Yogendra Yadav is almost a unique political personality in India today. For someone like me, who is a scholar of politics and a scholar of Indian politics and political economy, he's actually a very inspiring scholar. For two reasons. Reason number one is not necessarily that he has published his own articles in the top tier journals or published his own books which have made him famous, which is what most of us do in the profession. He has two significant achievements. The first is the one where, at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, he created a network called Lokniti. And the network called Lokniti collects the best and the most extensive political data that is available for any student of Indian politics. So whether you're a scholar at Harvard or at Michigan or at Brown, you have to be a good friend of Lokniti to be able to get to that data. And I can tell you that many students will get their doctoral degrees and many American professors will get their tenures based on their access to this data. But it's not just that Lokniti makes this data available. Lokniti also does its own work on this data and publishes regularly very important pieces in the Economic and Political Weekly, which, as you know, is probably India's most widely read social science journal. And from those articles, do we come to know, with a great degree of authority, the manner in which Indian politics is evolving. Second, apart from this major contribution to the study of Indian politics, Dr. Yogendra Yadav got into a collaborative project with two very famous American professors and said something that was very controversial, very debatable, and very profound. And that is that India is not a classic nation state. Rather, it is a state nation. That is, the state was created before the nation, and the nation is evolving around the state. And I'm not going to argue with this theory of state nation, but just to point you out in that direction. So it is with such a firm groundedness on India, its politics, and the nature of its identity that Dr. Yogendra Yadav has entered politics. Now, I'm not going to say much about his political personality, which is very well known, which is available on television most of the time, and I will leave it to him to explain to us more about what he has been doing to Indian politics and what Indian politics has been doing to him. We all know that before the Aam Aadmi party came to power in Delhi, a lot of people thought that Indian politics was only about money. So one of the major propositions in Indian politics that was debunked when the Aam Aadmi party came to power in Delhi was that you can actually win a major election without being funded in the way in which the major political parties in India are. So I think with that, I will leave the floor for Dr. Yogendra Yadav, who will tell us about the topic, which is politics of social movement, reflections on the Aam Aadmi party experience in India. Yogendra.
Thank you, Rahul. As you could guess, this is an old friend introducing another friend. I'm grateful to the Institute, to the university here, to Rajan and other friends here in Singapore who made it possible. And my apologies for turning up late. We were experiencing the beauties of this campus, for which we had scheduled for after the talk, but we experienced it before the talk. I wouldn't talk today about much of what Rahul described, because in many ways that's my past, that's history. And I'm now in a different phase of my life, and I'm grateful that you gave me an opportunity to reflect on that phase of my life, which has involved too much affection and very little reflection. So far, to borrow your phrase, Indian politics has done more to me than I may have done to Indian politics. So I really welcome this opportunity to share a few words about that. In a nutshell, let me begin by saying that Aam Aadmi Party is the first nationally viable experiment in alternative politics. I'll stay with this sentence for some time, because there are three important components here. One, that it's the first nationally viable. It's not the first of its kind, but first nationally viable in independent India. Second, that it's an experiment. And third, that it's about alternative politics. Let me spell these three out to say something about what is it that Aam Aadmi Party represents. Let me begin in the reverse order. What do I mean by alternative politics? What I do not mean is alternative to politics. Because for far too long, citizens in India, thinking minds in India, middle class and intellectuals, everyone learned to hate politics. And everyone said, as they say in Hindi, sab neta chor. And what out with politics. Get rid of these politicians. I must confess that this kind of talk worried me enormously, because as a student of politics, as a student of democracy, I know that anti-politics is also anti-democracy. So, what Aam Aadmi Party represents, for me, alternative politics, it does not mean alternatives to politics. It is very much purely political. I must also confess that the movement, the party owes its origins to Anna movement. And in the first phase of Anna movement, there were strands of anti-politics there, which used to worry people like me. But thankfully, Aam Aadmi Party does not represent that strand. It is also not just political alternatives. There are many, there are very many, there are more than you need in India. There are 1,400 political parties. Our parliament has about 25 to 30 political parties on any given day represented inside the parliament, which is one of the highest in the world. So we are not short of political alternatives, which is to say alternative political parties within the establishment. So they are from the establishment, they follow rules of the game. But you throw out Congress, you get BJP, you throw out BJP, you get Congress back, or it's Samajwadi Party, BSP in Uttar Pradesh, or it's Akali Congress, or whatever. You get all kinds of combinations in different parts of India. But Aam Aadmi Party is not about political alternatives in that routine sense of the term. It is, as I said, about alternative politics. What does alternative politics mean? Alternative politics has to be different and better in at least 2 or 3 respects. One, that it must bring a new vision of India. Today is not the day for me to talk about it, but in Q&A or wherever, I'd be happy to talk about that. But when you say I'm for alternative politics, you have to have a new and different vision. B, you must challenge rules of the game. You must come up with new rules of the game. You must not play the game of politics by the known rules, which Rahul mentioned. And third, you must bring in a new organizational culture, which is different from the way political parties practice the game in India. So these are three yardsticks by which you would judge whether something is alternative politics or not. I'm not claiming that Aam Aadmi Party has reached there. I'm not saying we are alternative politics. All I'm claiming is that it is an experiment aimed at alternative politics. Okay, so that's phrase one. The second part was first nationally viable in post-independence India. That's important. That's a very big claim. There have been all kinds of parties. But the interesting thing, if you look at it, is most political parties in India today can be traced back to one or the other existing political parties in 1947. It's a strange claim, but just come to think of it. Take someone like Nitish Kumar, JDU. JDU comes from JD, which comes from Janata Party, which comes from Socialist Party, which comes from CSP. It's an existing stream. Look at all the various Marxist, leftist, communist combinations, they all come from CPI. The BJP of today is Jansangh of 1952. And not to mention, the grand old family of Congress and its hundreds of branches that exist today. There are actually very few political parties, political formations that have not originated from one of the branches that existed in 1947. So once you exclude that, if you look at post-independence period, and if you look at new experiments and new experiments of various kinds in alternative politics, Aam Aadmi Party is not the first experiment. There have been many. And before I entered Aam Aadmi Party, I had the honor and pleasure of participating in more than one failed ventures, attempts at creating alternative politics, which were all spectacular failures. And I had the pleasure, delight of working with all of them. So it's clearly not the first experiment of its kind. The idea that mainstream politics is rotten, that something needs to be done, that alternatives are required, is at least 30-year-old. In early 1980s, this identification had begun. This is the conclusion to which many of the finest political minds in the country had reached in early 1980s. And if you go back to Rajni Kothari's books in the early 80s, Rajni Kothari, D.F. Sheikh, Ashish Gandhi, or outside the political science, social science frame, if you look at what Kishan Patnaik was saying at that time, all of them have arrived at this conclusion in 1980s, early 80s, that mainstream political parties are dead and rotten, that new energy needs to come, that new energy will come from social movements of the country, and that you are looking at political formations which are not necessarily political parties. All that intellectual ground was prepared by 1982-83. Yet, you do not quite have something which succeeds for 30 years. This is the period where many experiments take place. And some beautiful experiments. I really think because Aam Aadmi Party has become so visible today, we tend to forget everything that did not succeed prior to that. But I do hope that in an academic institution like this, some of you might wish to go back to those experiments, see why they did not succeed, and why this experiment, which initially no one took seriously, actually succeeded. Just to mention some of them. The regional one, the party called Chhattisgarh Mukti Morcha, founded by Shankar Guha Niyogi, extraordinary experiment. They actually almost succeeded electorally. They won a couple of seats way back. Samajwadi Jan Parishad, an organization founded by Kishan Patnaik, I was a member of that, began in 1995, had, in terms of ideological clarity, again an extraordinary attempt to revive socialist movement in India. And in terms of personnel, the glimpse, today we get glimpses of honest people coming to politics. I can assure you Samajwadi Jan Parishad had dozens of them. Some of the most extraordinary human beings you could ever find in India were there. Did not succeed. Spectacular failure. Some of the well-known activists of the country, Medha Patkar, Aruna Roy, Kuldeep Nair, all of them have been involved in creating something called Lok Rajniti Manch in 2004, 2009. Never took off. So there have been many attempts. So this is not the first experiment of alternative politics. It's the first nationally viable attempt. It crossed the threshold of visibility and viability. And that's what is so unusual about this effort. Because to my mind, Aam Aadmi Party intuitively understood what most social movements never understood. Most social movements never understood the logic of electoral politics. That is to say, in politics, like in business, there is a minimum requirement of scale. Till you hit a certain scale, your returns to scale are zero, are negative. That's a basic thing of politics. That is something no social movement actually understood. And therefore, most of these experiments that I talked about were focused on one constituency, one state, not even one whole state, 5 constituencies in one state and so on. And the logic of electoral politics is such that it punishes you if you are small scale. So this is a logic which was first understood by Kanshi Ram. Kanshi Ram was a great theoretician of Indian politics, he wasn't taken seriously because he didn't speak English. But he understood the logic of electoral politics. And he said, if you want to contest Haryana, contest all the 90 seats, not one less. Aam Aadmi Party intuitively understood that. So it understood the logic of scale. It understood the fact that cross-sectional mobilization was essential. Most of the social movements of the last 3 decades have been movements which have focused on one section of society, no doubt the most oppressed section. But the logic of electoral politics is such that unless you have cross-sectional mobilization, unless you mobilize at least 99%, you can still give up on 1%. But you have to speak to the rest, which social movements never did. So if I went to Madhya Pradesh to meet my friend, who's no more, one of the finest Adivasi activists, he was not an Adivasi himself, spent 30 years in Adivasi area, could be worshipped, was worshipped by Adivasis in that area. But people in the nearby town had not heard his name. So social movements are sort of divided like this. There is a necessity to have cross-sectional mobilization, which is what Aam Aadmi Party understood intuitively once again, and moved ahead. And third, it requires a communication strategy that social movements had ignored. Social movements had ignored mainstream media and had almost created a small alternative media for itself. Aam Aadmi Party and the movement prior to that understood how to connect to mainstream media and to remain visible. That's why, since I'm in Aam Aadmi Party, obviously I would wish to claim that this succeeded because we were the best. But I think from distance, an analyst might point out several things other than that, which made us succeed, which others could not do. And this is about scale, it's about communication strategy, it's about bandwidth of issues and sections that we spoke to. So that's why this is the first nationally viable. I'm not saying we are here to stay. It's too early for us to judge all those things. But it is an experiment which has become visible all over the country and which got traction in ways that no one else did. We got 2% vote nationally. Now that looks tiny, but 2% national vote is 1.1 crore. What would it be in millions? 11 millions. I still think it grows. So it's about 11 million votes. Now that's huge for a new political party that's 1.5 years old. So that's what has made it viable. Finally, to that word experiment. What makes it an experiment? Experiment in a deeper sense, that this was an attempt, it's an open-ended attempt which challenged the given scripts of politics. 20th century had, we have inherited several scripts of politics from the 20th century. Some of these could be scripts of the right, some of these could be scripts of the left. It doesn't matter, but these are prefabricated models of how to bring about change in society. The trouble with Aam Aadmi Party, as many intellectuals in India pointed out, that most of its leaders did not understand those scripts. They had no idea of what these were engineers, management people who came in, who had no idea of those scripts. And therefore, for certain kinds of intellectuals, they looked almost foolish. They appeared to be people who did not know, who did not have understanding. But my point is that it is precisely their lack of understanding that enabled them to do what they did, because they were not carrying that burden. See, knowledge can enable, but it can also seriously disable you from doing things. It's a debilitating thing, a certain kind of knowledge, and especially if you're walking in a beautiful campus like NUS, and if you happen to be carrying the map of NYU, then carrying a map can be the biggest handicap that you have. And someone who doesn't have a map, doesn't know the campus, will still after 15 minutes or so figure it out. But someone who's walking with an NYU map could never figure it out. And that's what's been happening in Indian politics, especially in Indian radical politics. We've been carrying a map. We were all convinced that the map was essential, except that the map was from a different city. And the attempt was to navigate this city with the help of another map. The advantage that Aam Aadmi Party politicians, these young people who had no idea of politics, was that they carried no map, that they did not feel the necessity of having a map. Everyone else laughed at them and said, yes, these fellows, they don't even have a map. But precisely because they did not have a map, that they actually could do something, they reached somewhere. Because the tradition of carrying map of old European cities and walking around in Delhi, that tradition was given up. So it's an experiment which has junked prefabricated models of how to bring about change. An experiment that has junked the scripts of revolutionary transformation. I used to joke with my friends in the university days. What would happen one day if revolution were to actually come and shake your hand? And I used to say to my leftist friends, I can guarantee you, you would not welcome her. You would say, you're too early, you're too late, this is not the sari in which you were meant to come. Why, how are you wearing this kind of sari? The trouble is that we come with so much that our journey of politics is so heavily and thickly scripted that we've lost sense of what to do and how to do. And in that deeper sense, Aam Aadmi Party was in a sense liberated from those scripts. So it's an experiment which is open-ended. Open-ended both about its destination and about its route. That can be dangerous. I'm not saying that this kind of open-endedness is something to be celebrated, because there is only a thin line between being open-minded and being vacuous. But to begin with, this was a great strength. So it's an experiment which is open-ended, both about its destination and about the route. So in that sense, Aam Aadmi Party, I submit, is the first nationally viable experiment in alternative politics in independent India. What remains for me to do is to present you a quick balance sheet of what it has achieved so far and what challenges it confronts today. What have we achieved? In a very narrow electoral terms, as I said, we got little over 2% national vote share, which must be put in perspective by saying that this is not the vote share a new party gets. The only two successful experience of new parties which made it to the national level in the last 3 decades have been the BSP and the BJP. Now BJP isn't quite a new party, wasn't quite a new party because they had Jansangh and Janata Party legacy to build on, but at least they in essence relaunched themselves in 1984. BJP got 2 seats, they got 7% of the national vote share. The BSP launched itself in 1989 at the national level. They were active for the last 5 years before that. But in a sense, they launched themselves in 1989. They got 2% votes, they got 3 seats. These are the only 2 successful experiments, launches in the last 3 decades. Aam Aadmi Party was little over 2% and 4 seats. So in that sense, although it was seen and presented to be a disappointment, and I must confess that for most of my colleagues also it was a disappointment, because somehow Delhi spoiled us. You know, we contested Delhi election, we got 29% votes and we got 28 seats. It's a dream debut, it's a 1 in a million kind of a debut that happens. And once it happened, everyone inside the party and outside the party started assuming that this is how we will always perform whenever we go in the electoral battle. Hard-boiled cynics like me kept saying, no, no, please don't do it. You know, you got it. You know, everything you touch may not be gold. And you know, the usual route is a very long and hard route. Establishing political parties is not a joke. Great that we got a kickstart, but let's not assume that that's what we get every time. You know, it has to be long, hard road. But you know, people didn't expect it. So yes, it was there was a sense of dejection and failure. But I want to put that in perspective by saying, even this failure is more of a success than anything of its kind ever in post-independence India. You know, we think many of you, if you have any Andhra Pradesh connection, you would know of Lok Satta Party. You know, which did well, which was seen as that one ray of hope. Just to put that in perspective, Lok Satta Party had 1.2% vote in Andhra Pradesh, which is what made it so visible, so happening. And here is a party that got more than 2% nationally. You know, so there is that breakthrough. The party is viable in 2 states of the Indian Union, in Delhi and in Punjab. In Punjab, with 25% vote share, it's a viable party. We may win, we may not win. There's another by-election, and these assessments will keep changing every week, every 2 months. But the point is, in Punjab, you cannot now bypass Aam Aadmi Party. It's a player to reckon with. It's one of the 3 established players. So we are viable in 2 states. We have name recognition across the country. I traveled after my campaign was over. I sort of went around the country in different parts. And in villages in Tamil Nadu, I cannot claim the entire state, but yes, villages say 100 kilometers away from Chennai. People knew what this Aam Aadmi culture was. That there was something like this, that there was someone called Arvind Kejriwal, and then there was a broom. So there's a name recognition has spread in ways which is amazing. In Kashmir village, where again I was campaigning, these young adults were, you know, actually boys, 11, 12-year-old boys were quarreling with each other about this Aam Aadmi Party poster. Now, if you know, this is a part of the country where you cannot pay people to put a poster of the Prime Minister of India. You know, they will, you pay them 100 rupees and ask them to put a poster, they will put it. And they were quarreling over Arvind Kejriwal poster and where to put it there. So it's an amazing name recognition, which may not have translated into votes, but there is name recognition. there is goodwill, reservoir of goodwill, which hasn't yet translated into votes. But for every one person who may have voted, there were 3 or 4 who thought hard about voting for this party, finally decided not to, because the first past the post system and its compulsions kick in. But there's reservoir of goodwill. On a conservative estimate, the party has about 100,000 volunteers. And when I say volunteer, I don't mean someone who just sat on the polling booth for one day. These volunteers would be who devoted substantial chunk of their time to party's campaign, say something like 10 to 15 days during campaign time, who gave up things in order to do something meaningful for the party. So about 100,000 people with a dream, 100,000 people who are willing to give up something in their life to fulfill that dream. When was the last time we heard something of that kind? In some parts of India, JP movement was that. In other parts of India, the Next Life movement, whatever we call it today, it represented dream, it represented idealism and aspirations. But in many other parts of the country, you would go 50, 60 years, you would probably go back to the freedom movement to find the last time people with idealism investing in politics. So that's sort of certain kind of achievement. On a more enduring plane, have we succeeded in changing rules of the game? Not quite, but we've begun to challenge some of them. 2 years ago, there was a complete understanding, or setting as it would be called in Hindi, that the big parties will not talk about each other's corruption at the top level. Robert Vadra will not be spoken about, Ranjan Bhattacharya will not be spoken about. This was unsaid rules of the Indian politics. And then come these boys who know nothing about these rules, and they come and shatter it. Arvind Kejriwal, Prashant Bhushan, they actually talk about Robert Vadra. And then Indian media realizes that you actually can speak about Robert Vadra. So they start speaking about one rule gets shattered. So lots of things begin to happen. Ambanis are still very difficult to talk about. In terms of rules of the game, political parties are beginning to feel slightly embarrassed about fielding some of the worst criminals and corrupt people. I'm not saying they are no longer nominating them, they are nominating them. But it's a shade more embarrassing than it used to be 2 years ago. At least now someone in the party circle says, but this one is particularly notorious, can we do without him? At least that talk has begun. And something of the agenda has also begun to shift. Nationalist Congress Party, led by Sharad Pawar, and anyone who knows Indian politics or Mumbai or Western India knows Sharad Pawar. They released their manifesto, and the manifesto began by promising a corruption-free India. This could be the biggest joke of the century. But hypocrisy tells you something very serious. Hypocrisy is lip service being paid to something substantive. You don't pay lip service to anything or anyone. So that who pays lip service to whom is a very serious business. That Sharad Pawar's party talks about corruption-free India begins to suggest to you that something in agenda is being shifted. Smaller parties all over the world have had great impact in agenda setting. Green parties of Europe are a classic example. They never acquired power, but they managed to shift the agenda of all mainstream parties towards somewhat greenish issues. So there's a beginning of that. It takes time, but it's just the beginning. This is what I would sort of see as some of the, what the Aam Aadmi Party has achieved so far. And finally, let me quickly list some of the challenges. There are short-term, medium-term, and long-term challenges. Short-term challenge is for the Aam Aadmi Party to recover the lost ground in Delhi. Delhi city is where we had our initial breakthrough. where we formed government, though we're in minority, where we gave up that government. Recovering that is essential to our remaining viable at a national level. Not because we are a regional party, which we certainly are not because there's something special about Delhi city, no, but simply because that's where we got our initial breakthrough. And then, you see, launching a political party is like launching a rocket. You either cut through the gravitational pull within the first 15 seconds, or you're down and over. So what the great thing about Aam Aadmi Party experiment was that in the very first instance, when we fired all our engines, and I can see many friends in the room who fired their personal engines and put in everything that could possibly go for, and that in the very first instance, it broke that gravitational barrier. We need to keep that up. That's important. And therefore Delhi is important. That's a short-term challenge. As I was packing to go to airport, came the news that we had the survey done by India Today, Mood of the Nation survey, which predictably shows that that Narendra Modi is very popular in the first 3 months. What else do you expect? But the important thing that it says is that in Delhi city, Aam Aadmi Party has begun to recover. That from 0, by their estimate, we are up to 2 seats. So something has begun to change there. So that's a short-term but crucial challenge. In the medium term, our challenge is to think of an organizational form, which is, we started as a movement, we become a party. We are not quite a party, we are no longer quite a movement. We don't need to become a party. We don't need to give up on a movement. That's what we promised. Arvind said when we formed the party that, we will continue to agitate, we will continue to while being a political party. So in the medium term, our challenge is to look for organizational form, which allows us to retain that movement party character. It need not conform to standard textbook models of political parties. But how does that matter? Textbooks will be read. That's what politics is for. So the medium-term challenge is to rethink organizational form and to develop a policy frame, a new almost ideology. The reason I hesitate in using the word ideology is that it reminds us of the ready-made packages of 20th century. Left or right or Gandhian or whatever. There are too many isms floating around. And one of the things Aam Aadmi Party has done, needs to do further, is to open each of these packages and say, I like this slice from this package, I like that one from here, I don't need to buy any of these ready-made packages. But then reassemble it and to give it coherence and shape. In other words, the challenge is to draw upon the legacy of the 20th century ideologies, but to refashion and rework it for the needs of 21st century India. That's a challenge, which is a medium-term challenge. I know I'm way beyond my time, so I'll just mention the last and final long-term challenge. The long-term challenge is to reimagine and reinvent what it means to do politics. We have very limited understanding of what it means to do politics. So the moment we declared ourselves a political party, my colleagues and friends say, now we can't do this, now we are a political party, so shall we do this? There is this man who I used to hate till yesterday. He's a standard run-of-the-mill politician, this person who's divided the communities, but now we are a political party, we need him, don't we? So shall I go and contact him? We have a very limited understanding of what it means to be political. And the long-term challenge is to rethink what it means to be politics. Politics is about elections. That's how we understand it. But politics is not necessarily only about elections. Politics involves struggles. But it's not only struggles and elections. In India, in the 20th century, politics was also about constructive work, things which today are done by NGOs. So we have parties, we have agitations, we have NGOs. And then we have those who spread ideas. These are ideational clubs. Politics involves doing all of these things. Ram Manohar Lohia in the 1960s had a lovely formulation for that. He used to say, Jain, vote, Fawra. Jain, which stood for struggles, vote, which was a symbol for elections, and Fawra, spade, for constructive work. Add to that reading and writing books, and you have a recipe for what it means to do politics in a richer sense of the term. When what you wear, what you eat, what you sing, what you photograph begins to define your politics. That is a long-term challenge for a project of alternative politics. My personal dream project is to compile a list of 100 ways of doing politics, of which item number 100 will be contesting elections and forming governments. But there are 99 other ways of doing it. Can I invite all of you to that? Thank you.
I know that we are running a little behind time, but our time is precious because we have people who can really give an insight into the emerging idea of India or emerging practice of India. Our next speaker, who probably will be a little briefer than he would have been otherwise because we are running out of time, is because we also want to ask questions because major propositions have been raised. Is Mr. Saish Jain, whom I do not know as intimately as I happen to know Yogendra Bhai, but I am told that he was a very successful investment banker who gave up a lot. Probably he doesn't feel that he gave up a lot because after all he did give up, right? And contested elections in Mumbai. So Mr. Saish Jain.
Thank you, Professor Rahul Mukherjee. Friends from the National University of Singapore, it is indeed an honor and pleasure to be addressing you. Obviously, I am not an academician or a great thinker like Yogendra Bhai, but I have the opportunity of working with him for the last few months, and I've learned quite a bit from him. I was told when I came here that I should be talking nice things about India, not be too negative. I'll be very honest, we came to fight a system which I thought was quite corrupt. And I'll be very honest in my speech today about what I think are the problems in India, what are the challenges. Obviously, India used to be a powerful economy. It used to be almost 25 to 30% of the global GDP for almost 1800 years after Christ. And somewhere down the line, because of colonization or the Industrial Revolution not participating in it, we lost our way. And since independence, I think corruption has been a big problem in India. We lose a large part of our GDP because wealth is concentrated in a very few hands. The gap between the haves and the have-nots has expanded over a period of time. And I think the Aam Aadmi Party was born out of this crusade against corruption. Swami Vivekananda once very famously said that society does not go down because of the actions of the corrupt, but because of the inactions of the good people. And there were a few brave hearts who took Swamiji very seriously. Satyendra Dubey in 2003, he was an employee of the National Highway Authority of India. He saw that there is a lot of corruption happening in the construction sector. He wrote a letter to the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, so stating about the corruption there, and he attached his resume separately. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister's office sent that letter to the Surface Transport Ministry, which was then sent to the vigilance officer. And Satyendra Dubey, instead of being rewarded, he was reprimanded by the vigilance officer. Why did you write to the Prime Minister directly? And a few days later, he sacrificed his life for the country. Another brave heart, Manjunath Shanmugam, on whom a movie was made recently. He took on the oil adulteration scam. As you know, There is a big gap between the price of kerosene and diesel in India, and that's the reason we have adulteration. Manjunath also had to lose his life in this battle against it. Our colleague, Santosh Kohli, she used to work very closely with Arvind. She took on the ration mafia scam in Delhi. There were 12 attempts on her life. And with each attempt, her resolve to fight this menace only grew stronger. She was nominated as a candidate for the Delhi Assembly elections. And despite very well knowing the threats to her life, she continued her inner battles. And she would sacrifice her life for the country. So there are several such examples. Ashok Khemka, an IAS officer, 45 transfers in 20 years. But he kept fighting against it. He was the one who could talk against Vadra, the most powerful family in the country, talked against it. So these are the inspirations. And Rahulji introduced me as I gave up a lot. But what these people have given, in the sense we've done very, very little. Arvindji quite famously says that अंधेरा आया तो रोशनी से भीख मांगने, हम अपना घर ना चलाते तो क्या करते? So we had to give up something. If we have to do something for this country, we had to do something. So when the opportunity came, we were canvassing in Delhi. I think it was like a freedom struggle for us. We didn't think about it as elections or politics or whatever. We didn't even know the names of the candidates. We just went out and he spoke about the corruption in this country. We spoke about the criminalization of politics. We spoke about communalism in politics. And we could quite sense that this is something that people wanted. And some people may have been surprised by what they saw as a result, the Delhi election result. But we knew it was coming because people were desperate for a change. And we were carrying that same wave across the country. In the 49 days that we had the government in Delhi, I think we did some revolutionary things. Many political parties could not have achieved that in several years. And everybody knows about it, but we halved the electricity tariffs, we managed to give water at much reasonable prices. Corruption in Delhi actually fell drastically. It was a fraction of what it was before the elections in Delhi. In Maharashtra, I had the opportunity of working on the electricity scam, which we call the power or the Pawar scam, we just mentioned about. So obviously the scam in Maharashtra was at different levels. So there was theft of electricity by the politicians. So electricity that was meant for the agricultural sector was diverted to the politicians, engineering colleges and their sugar factories. You had theft of coal. So as you know, coal in India comes from Coal India, which goes to the washery for actually verification of that coal. And then it goes to the power companies. So each MLA or an MP in Maharashtra, wherever there was a power plant, used to treat it as his personal fiefdom. And that coal used to go to the washeries, which were then controlled by some of these politicians. And the good coal used to be then sold into the open market. And the dirty coal, further mixed with mud and sand, was sent to the power plants. So actually, power plants of NTPC, which were made by of the same make, operated at 85% PLF, and Mahajanko's plant worked at 50% PLF. So this was low-hanging fruit. It was obvious. We did a few RTIs, got that information, put it to the people. It was covered very well by the press. The NCP goons attacked our office the next day. We decided to do our own protest, so we went and swept, we did the Chadu Abhiyan in front of the NCP offices. The police arrested our leaders. So it was a great experience. I think we made a difference, we made an impact. There were a lot of other scams which were done around the same time and which we unearthed. It was the irrigation scam, in which my colleague Anjali Damania, she played a big role in unearthing it. The decision to fight the elections, obviously it was not a premeditated decision. I had left my job earlier. But when the opportunity came, I thought it was a great opportunity for me to convey some of my deepest thoughts to the electorate. So we really didn't go the conventional way of campaigning. So we had a group of few dedicated volunteers. We went door to door because we did not have the resources like the other political parties. To put it into perspective, what we spent across the country for the national elections was what both the Congress and the BJP would have spent in a single constituency. In my constituency, they would have spent more than what we spent across the entire country. So we fought the entire elections for maybe 20 to 30 crore rupees, 200 to 300 million rupees. And I think both these parties would have spent in the single constituency more than that. So we did door-to-door campaigns, we did Nukkad Sabhas, we addressed the people, we went to the slum dwellers, we stayed with them, understood their problems. You wouldn't believe that there are tribal villages very close to Bombay, where still there is no water, there is no electricity, there is no basic medical facilities. So people still die of snake bites. By the time they are brought down, it's just 5 kilometers away. They have to lose their life. So I think this gap between haves and have-nots is quite stark, especially in a city like Mumbai. As you know that 2/3 of the city stays in the slums. So Mumbai is maybe 450 square kilometers. 85% of the population, 80 to 85% of the population stays in 10% of the land. So we had thought of a policy for housing in Mumbai, for example, where we could have provided housing to all the slum dwellers with good amenities, without any subsidy from the government. Why does this not happen? If this is so obvious to us, why doesn't it happen? Because the other political parties treat it as their vote bank. They want the poor to stay poor, so that their vote bank is protected. And when we went to the electorate with this promise, or this idea, they were very happy. Friends, when the election results were announced, obviously, as Yogendraji said, people thought that we didn't do as well or we lost. But I think we achieved quite a bit. 12 million votes or 2% vote share. I think it was a great achievement in my view. AAP still remains the hope for the country. I think we've achieved quite a bit, but there is a lot to achieve yet. What are we doing now? We're trying to build up a volunteer base. So we've got, as he said, 1 lakh volunteers in Mumbai. We're trying to build that base. You'd be surprised to know that a lot of people are still coming to us. People are saying that, okay, for the national elections we wanted stability, but when there are elections at the state or the corporation level, AAP will remain a relevant party to vote for. So we are forming Mohalla Sabhas. We have started a corruption helpline in Mumbai. And we've already got our first success. Just recently, the way it works is we've got a corruption helpline, people call on that. Our volunteers attend to that, they understand the ground realities. And then with the Anti-Corruption Bureau, we may take the help of the CBI if required. So there was one RPF case which came to us recently. And we got 2 people who were involved in corruption arrested. This was just 2 days back. In terms of Mohalla Sabhas, we think that Arvindji has written this in his book Swaraj. But I think that's the way to go. Because there is too much of centralization of power. That's the bane of our democracy. We are really not a democratic country in that sense. We take pride that we are the world's largest democracy and we've got a vibrant electoral system. But the voice of the people is really not heard. And that's the reason we want to give more power to the people. And then we are already seeing the benefit of that. The Mohalla Sabha that we have started forming earlier in Delhi and now in Bombay, people have started questioning their corporators. People have started questioning their MLAs. And if they are made a part of the decision making, if they are made a part of the money that comes to the constituency, they are made a part of spending that, I think that will be literally the victory for the democracy. So India is at an inflection point. We think that the next 5 to 10 years will be the best time for India because we are sitting on great demographics. India is a young country. More than 30%, more than 50% of the population is less than 30 years of age. India will be contributing more to the working population than US, Japan, Europe, and China put together over the next 10 years. So we need to capitalize on this opportunity. And this will happen only if corruption comes down. Because I think when we were working on the manifesto, for example, it was not no rocket science. India's GDP is completely understated. You've got a parallel economy which runs. So if that parallel economy is integrated into mainstream economy, even if your tax rates go down by 20-30%, your collections will actually increase by 20-30%. If your expenditure is more efficient, your fiscal deficit can get completely wiped out. So this is putting it a little simplistically, but I think that opportunity is very significant. So we are hoping for a better country. We will continue to work the way we have been, and maybe even harder. I think the Delhi elections will be a great opportunity for us. We have to show the country a governance model, because people think that, okay, we are good people, but we don't know how to govern. So we need to demonstrate that governance model. And if we do that, I think we will be able to make a significant impact. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time.